The listeners of the Browns Nation station can show their Browns Nation pride by going to brownsnationswag.com. The site has all the latest and best fan gear to represent your team. Again, that's brownsnationswag.com. Cue the music. It's time to start the show. Welcome to the Browns Nation station. I'm your host, Mark Bergin, joined this afternoon by John Achkar, and he is the host of the Hottest Take Sports podcast. John, we're recording this after the Browns' 16-6 loss to the Las Vegas Raiders. The Browns enter the bye week at 5-3. Curious about your big takeaway from this afternoon's game.
Well, first off, I just want to thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure. My big takeaway from this game is, we talked about it. Just the injuries really got to the Browns today, and it didn't help with the weather either. But, you can only use that as so much of an excuse.
Absolutely. I think the weather, you saw opening drive of the game, Raiders miss a field goal off the upright, and you saw how much the ball moved on that field goal, something that came back to bite the Browns at the very end when Cody Parkey misses a 37-yard field goal. And I know a lot of NFL fans remember Cody Parkey from the double doink game with the Bears and Eagles a few years ago, but certainly the weather played a factor in today's game. We mentioned the injuries. OBJ's obviously out. You've got Austin Hooper out, Wyatt Teller out, Nick Chubb out. We'll get into that. I see you're wearing an OBJ jersey on today's pod too. I appreciate that. Certainly the Browns could have used a play from any of their offensive skill position players, something they didn't really get in this afternoon's loss.
Yeah, and there's blame to go all around with the team for the loss, but it certainly didn't help with our drop passes today, coming from everyone, Jarvis to Kareem, David Njoku. It just seemed like no one could really pull it together and bring their A game today for the Browns. So that didn't help in the end of it.
Yeah, Mayfield, 12 of 25 passing, only 122 yards, no touchdowns. Didn't have any interceptions either, which I think is important in a game where ball control is so important and points were a premium. But coming into today's game, I thought that the Browns would have no problem putting up points against a Raiders team that had given up at least 24 points in every single game thus far this season. And so that was something that was kind of disappointing to me. Again, I think that the weather was certainly a factor in that. In today's game, you could see the snow coming down and the wind and just the timing of everything. I think this was a line of scrimmage game. John, I know we talked a little bit before the podcast. The Raiders dominated time of possession in this one, had the ball for nearly 38 minutes in today's game. Josh Jacobs got going on the ground, his first 100-yard game of the 2020 season. He had a career high 128 rushing yards on the ground for the Raiders this afternoon.
Yeah, the weather really pushed this one to a run game today, and it really just came down to who could dominate the line. And the Raiders did that both on offense and defense. Their offensive line was totally dominating our defensive line. And it also didn't help with Myles Garrett leaving the game with a knee injury too. So that certainly can't help the Browns at all when your all-pro, possibly defensive player of the year candidate goes out. And then on the defensive side, the Browns came in as the fifth best rushing defense in the entire NFL. And then you go and you give up 208 rushing yards to the Raiders. You're not going to win a game when a team runs the ball over you. And they kind of used our tactic on us today.
Yeah, the Browns got a taste of their own medicine by
Exactly.
the Raiders. And Myles Garrett's going to undergo an MRI tomorrow. It's a knee injury, and that came after the game from first-year head coach Kevin Stefanski. So keep your eye on that. And the Browns were certainly shorthanded. We mentioned OBJ out. We mentioned Austin Hooper out. I think the two guys the Browns missed the most, Wyatt Teller and Nick Chubb. Yeah, the Browns ran for 101 yards rushing today, but in the two previous games, held under 100 yards rushing. And that's what I would like to see, is get that running game going and then see how that opens up the passing game to the guys that you have on the outside and the tight ends. And that's something that this team has struggled with. I think the bye week comes at a great time for this Browns team because you can make sure that you get healthy. I know Jarvis Landry took that big hit towards the end too. He's playing with a cracked rib. So use this bye week to heal up, get healthy, and get right. And I'll say this, going into the bye at 5-3, I think a lot of Browns fans would have signed up for that at the start of the season.
Yeah, first off, I just want to say it still feels great to be 5-3. I haven't been alive for anything where the Browns have been better than that. So it we lost, but it still feels great. Um, Another big takeaway that I wanted to mention is in all three Browns losses this year, they haven't scored more than 7 points. So in the Browns losses, I know this one was kind of close today, but it feels like when we lose this year, like we're just really not getting any cylinders moving. Like we're just getting crushed.
That's surprising to me too. I know there's been some discussion where there are people out there who believe that Kareem Hunt is as effective of a running back as Nick Chubb. And I think you're seeing the value of Nick Chubb and how special of a player he is. I'm not saying Kareem Hunt isn't a starting caliber running back, but I just think you see what Nick Chubb brings to the table when he's healthy for the Browns, when he's back there, just because this Browns running game has not been what it was early on in the season, which in my opinion is this team's strength.
Yeah, and just going back to what you said earlier, you hit it right on the head. I don't think this bye week could come at a better time for the Browns because you go and get Hooper back from his appendectomy. You possibly get Nick Chubb back. That's the one questionable one. Wyatt Teller was, I think, questionable till Thursday, and then he was ruled out. So you definitely should have him back too. And he was playing at an all-pro caliber before that. He was the number one ranked guard per PFF. He still is, but he hasn't played. And those three weapons alone on offense could put this team over the top and get them back into the winning column versus two easy teams like the Texans and the Eagles.
Absolutely. And the defensive side of the ball, it was troublesome to me when they show up a close up of Josh Jacobs' face and he's grinning ear to ear. And it's just like, oh man. And I know at that point, only allowing 16 points for this defense, considering how long they were on the field this afternoon. I thought that they kept the team in the game for as long as they could. It's going to be awfully hard if you only score 6 points in a game to win it in the 2020 NFL. And I think that's a great point in terms of the other losses that the Browns have had is their offensive struggles. And it just shows you the importance of playing complementary football.
It's weird with this Browns team because it really seems like when we lose, our defense is playing at their best. But when we're winning, it's just always a shootout. And if the Browns are going to want to make it to the playoffs and even win a playoff game, your defense has to play well. You can't not show up on offense, but you have to be able to stop the ball on defense. And we haven't been able to stop their opposing passing games all year. And today, the run game. So something has to change here.
Yeah, and we'll see if the Browns can get it right after the bye. They'll have the Texans out of the bye week. I want to get into good call, bad call, and there were two key plays in this one that I wanted to talk about. One was the Henry Ruggs touchdown reception that got called back, and then the other one was Hunter Renfro's touchdown reception that was upheld after a replay review. Just kind of wanted to get your take on whether you thought that was a good call or bad call on today's game, John.
So talking about the Ruggs one, I mean, obviously there's going to be bias with me being a Browns fan, but I think that was a good call. Whenever I've watched, listening to the rules guys, reading some like even officiating rules, the ball touches the ground and he doesn't have control. That's not a touchdown. And I think they got it right with Ruggs. But Ruggs, in his case, that was stepping out of bounds. And I think that was a good call because you could see his toe was really slightly touching the white. There was some green there, but if it's not something obvious, you can't overturn it. And it wasn't quite obvious at all. So I think that was a good call on their part, just because you got to call it fair like that. And it wasn't obvious, like I said before. And then regarding Renfro, I think that was a bad call because one, I don't think he had full control of the ball. And two, the ball touched the ground. We all saw that. And Jarvis, I know they called his back, and that wasn't a touchdown either, but his touched the ground too, and he didn't really have control. And they seemed like quite similar plays. Renfro definitely had more control, but the tip of the ball was still touching while he didn't have full control.
Yeah, I think the word you used, obvious, I would use the word conclusive with the
Mm-hmm.
Ruggs touchdown to where it has to be, definite for you to
Overturn it.
overturn. Exactly. The Renfro one, the ball seemed to still be moving, but it's like, do the Raiders then go on to still score even if that is overturned? I can't help but I wonder about that. But at that point, it was like, oh man, just considering how this game's gone to this point, it's going to be awfully hard for the Browns to go down and score just because they haven't scored a touchdown to this point in the game. And again, I go back to coming into the game, I didn't think points would be a problem, but that's where I think that the weather actually played a huge factor in today's game. So my big takeaways from today's game would be how the weather impacted the game, and then all of the injuries that the Browns have dealt with. And then again, going into the bye week, the importance of that. There are a few other plays that really stuck out to me. The Larry Ogunjobi face mask penalty, to me, that was just a sign of this is pretty much how this day has gone for the Browns today. Because
Exactly.
initially it's like he makes a great sack on quarterback Derek Carr, and then it's like, all for naught, the Raiders are going to get a first down because he's reaching, grasping, trying to make a play, and he gets called for the face mask there. But one the Browns I think can kind of just forget about, because I think if this game is, it's weird to me because the Raiders play in a stadium that in Las Vegas now that has that retractable roof, and they lose a game where the elements play a condition they should be used to be playing outside, and they lose to a Raiders team that's an indoor dome team. It just shows you any given Sunday, sometimes it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, luck did not seem to be on the side of the Browns today. And even with that last drive, Jedrick Wills got called for, I think, offsides, and it took us to a 3rd and 15 that we couldn't convert. And then you push Cody Parkey back to like a 38-yard field goal, and he misses it. So there just wasn't luck on the side. I don't know if Ogunjobi's hand was even trying to get Carr's face mask on that last drive, but it just happened. It just seemed like everything was not going our way today. But then again, you're the Browns. You play in Cleveland. You got to be able to account for the weather, and you can only account for so much weather. Like it looked like the snow was really bad. It looked like it was hailing. The wind was like 30 plus miles per hour, and like that's hard. Like I talked to Austin Siebert, and he's like, people are always telling me you got to make this, you got to make that, but they're not kicking these field goals when the wind's 30 miles per hour and it's freezing cold, and you're literally on the edge of Lake Erie. So like you got to give some leeway there, but also at the same time, like, guys, this is your home stadium. Like, you got to know how to play the weather.
100%. And I think that goes back to my point about the importance of establishing the running game, because you can rely on that in your offensive line and to dominate the line of scrimmage versus trying to throw the ball through the air where, okay, even if you have the most accurate passer in the NFL, the wind blows one way or another, and a ball can hang up there for longer than you anticipated, or it can blow it in one direction or the other, and that can change the outcome of a game. And so that kind of goes back to my point of, especially when the weather gets cold, look, I know it's not fun to tackle Nick Chubb or Kareem Hunt, so get those guys going, get them the ball in space.
Yeah, and it certainly doesn't help when someone of the caliber of Nick Chubb isn't out. You should be able to run the ball with a running back like with like a running back Kareem Hunt. He's awesome. I think he's top 15, top 10 running back in this league. But it also doesn't help not having someone like Nick Chubb. And you've seen sort of a trend in the NFL where teams are getting 2 running backs. They're splitting carries, and they're just divvying it up. It gives the running backs more energy. There's less wear and tear. And that's what the Browns were doing early in the season. They're rolling with it. But it's just tough. And you saw guys on the Raiders today, like Devonta Booker, step up and have big runs for them. So the Browns are just kind of lacking that right now. And I think they'll make up for it, though.
Yeah. What couple of questions I have about the Browns team moving forward is, does this team make a move ahead of this upcoming week's trade deadline? That's a question I have, something I'm keeping my eye on. Continue to evaluate Baker Mayfield's play, of whether it's worth it to pick up that 5th-year option on his rookie deal. And then you're wearing OBJ's jersey. Do you think OBJ's played his last game as a Cleveland Brown? So those are the 3 things that I have. Trade deadline, not really sure. A lot of times it depends on what you can fetch in return for any kind of proposed trade. Mayfield, I think you need to give him the benefit of the doubt, give him a large sample size. Again, I always point to 4th head coach in his 3rd NFL season. Give him a large sample size to make that determination. At 5-3, you're on pace to go 10-6. That's probably good enough to get you into the postseason in 2020, especially considering 7 teams per conference are going to make the playoffs. And then with OBJ, I know that report came out just before kickoff that he might have played his last game in the Cleveland Browns, but what can you get for him in return, I think is the biggest key to that, because if you're not getting fair value back, he was a guy who I think could have made a huge difference for the Browns today.
Yeah, so your first question regarding the trade deadline, I don't see a reason why the Browns wouldn't go out and do something. I know Andrew Berry kind of wants to be a little bit more conservative with his draft picks, but at the same time, like if you want to win, if you want to make the playoffs, like you're gonna have to spend a little bit. And like as much as people like hate on our safety group and Andrew Sendejo and stuff, one glaring need that the Browns have had the whole season is like a good middle linebacker. And you keep seeing it. These teams just keep running it up the gut on us. And then after they get past our defensive line, they're getting 5 or 6 yards because we just don't have anyone there. I don't know if that's our scheming or if it's just an impact player, but we haven't had someone that's been able to, even quarterbacks like Derek Carr was rushing up the gut today. You get like 14 yards. Like that just can't happen. And we've had like quarterbacks rush on us like that the entire season. So I think that's the first thing you need to change. But I mean, one big question coming into today too was how well would Olivier Vernon play? Because before today he had 0 sacks, he had like 7 QB pressures, and then he comes and has 2 sacks. So I mean, in essence, that's good, but it also makes Andrew Berry's job a lot harder because now he's got to evaluate: do I stick with this guy or do I go and trade for someone else? Because before this week it was like, get rid of Vernon, go get another edge defender. Like you have to do that.
With Vernon, I think he's been playing hurt. He doesn't have that same burst off the line of scrimmage from what we've seen him in years past. I don't think he's 100% healthy. Granted, in week 8 of the season, I don't think any guy's quite 100%, but he just doesn't have that same burst off the edge from what we've seen from him as a player. And I know he's not gotten that same production. I know the Browns restructured his contract in the offseason. A lot of Browns fans want to see that production out of him, but I don't think he's quite right. And he probably wouldn't say that and be outright and forthright from that. But I think that's where you see some lack of production from him is I don't think he's quite 100% healthy. I don't know what percentage I'd put that at, but I think that's just my opinion there.
Do you mind if I take a second? My
No
brother
problem.
needed
I'll
my
pause
keys.
it. Okay, so we're back, and we were talking about Olivier Vernon getting 2 sacks this afternoon, but his lack of production overall in 2020. And it's my opinion that he's been playing hurt this season. John, the floor is yours in terms of how you feel about that. But that's just my opinion on Vernon, his production or lack thereof thus far this season.
It's kind of seemed like, well, he's been with the Browns these past 2 years. He's always been hurt. So it's like, and like, I know he's a good player, but like, he's only getting older and he seems like he's always hurt. So if you're someone like him, like you got to be able to play through those injuries. And given I'm not an NFL player, I don't know how it feels. It probably hurts like hell, but it's just, you got to be able to produce. And before today, he didn't produce. And the thing is, like, he's on the last year of his contract with the Browns, so it doesn't matter that much what he does this year. It just matters for this year. And like, he won't have a long-term impact with this team, and that's what doesn't matter. But it does matter because the Browns are pushing for a playoff spot this year. You got to have someone opposite of Myles Garrett to terrorize the opposing quarterbacks.
And how much easier on the back end that makes the secondary's job, linebackers' job of if you're causing chaos in the backfield for opposing teams' quarterbacks, opposing teams' running backs, makes everyone else's job a lot easier. So what's your opinion then of Baker Mayfield's 5th-year option on his rookie deal? I'm of the notion, give it a large sample size, let this season play out, then make a decision. I know there were some Browns fans clamoring for Case Keenum to start. I am not one of those people. I think there's a reason Case Keenum's been a journeyman on his 6th team in 9 NFL seasons. He's 32 years old. No, he had that 2017 run with the Vikings and Kevin Stefanski back in the day. But I think the Browns have to see what they have in the former number 1 overall pick in Baker Mayfield. And then the question you have to ask yourself is, okay, you don't want to pick up his 5th-year option. Who are you going to? What's your plan? And so, look, I don't think Mayfield's quite played up to being that number 1 overall pick. At the same time, I still think you can win with him as your quarterback in the NFL. But where do you stand on that, John?
Well, first off, I don't think it's even a Case Keenum thing. I just think you have to give Baker the chance to prove himself. And I mean, yes, he's had like 4 different offensive coordinators, 3 different head coaches, and that certainly can't help. But there's been mistakes that he's made that a guy in his position shouldn't be making, like that Minka Fitzpatrick pick versus the Steelers. Like, you got to be able to pick out that safety and know that he's going to be coming that way. But at the same time, I'm on the Bake train. I think I like 100% think the Browns have to give him the chance. You got to let him play out the season. I think people who are asking for Case to come in, maybe in that Steelers game it was fine because Baker was obviously hurting and their front seven was tearing us apart. Like, our offensive line couldn't block anything. But I mean, for that reason, put Case in. But otherwise, like, there's no reason to put him in. Like, let Baker prove himself. Personally, I think he's capable. I think he'll be our quarterback in the future. But I don't know. I just wouldn't give in to these critics.
Yeah, it's as long as he's healthy,
Yeah.
you have to play him. Now, if his
Uh-huh.
ability is compromised with that rib injury, okay. But then we saw last week where he throws 5 touchdown passes, had 21 consecutive completions. You mentioned the Minka Fitzpatrick interception, and then last week starting out 0 of 5. The thing that's troublesome with that is you talk to people in the NFL is your first 10, 15, 20 plays are all scripted. So you know, and you script it out with your offensive coordinator, which 10, 15, 20 plays that you're going to run to start against an opposing team that you've game planned for, you've watched tape on. And so when you see him throw an interception on the very first plays of games, that's where you scratch your head and say, well, what was the preparation for? Not that he doesn't have the ability, but mentally, he's not making the right reads. And that's the troublesome thing with Mayfield. At the same time, we can both cherry pick stats about Mayfield all we want to, because we've seen the highs of that with 21 consecutive completion. We've seen the lows of that when he's
Mm-mm.
throwing interceptions and making passes that he shouldn't. And so when I see that a lot of times with Browns fans, you hop on Twitter of, oh, put Keenum in, put Keenum in. And it's like you're cherry picking stats of trying to make your case when, again, I go back to you need that large sample size. The Browns need stability at the quarterback position, at the head coaching position, and at the general manager position. And it's something that this franchise has not had since they came back into existence. And so and this is the reason why this franchise hasn't made the postseason since the 2002 season, the NFL's longest active playoff drought. The best franchises in the NFL have stability at those 3 roles. I think we know what we have thus far with Kevin Stefanski through 8 games as a first-year head coach to be 5-3. He's changed the culture for the Browns. I like what Andrew Berry's done so far, but you got to give Baker Mayfield the benefit of the doubt to see what he can do. And that's the thing I always go back to is, okay, if you do want to get rid of him, what's your alternative? Because NFL fans want to do this all the time with head coaches too, of we need to fire this guy or we need to bench that guy. Okay, what's your plan then once that happens? And if you don't have an answer, you need to think about it a little bit more critically.
A couple things that I want to hit on for what you said. First off, with stability. It's not fair for the development of players if you keep switching head coaches, you keep switching position coaches. There's no way that a player can develop and learn a system if they're constantly having to learn new ones. I think Andrew Berry has done a great job so far and picking the right talent and getting these 1-year deals. I mean, he has a lot to do this next upcoming offseason, especially if Baker Mayfield doesn't work out. Like, what do you do with the future of the team? But I think it's good right now. I think Kevin Stefanski is the coach of our future. But I also think it hurt the Browns' whole organization as a whole. They finally did give a chance to a coach to be stable, to be here for 3 seasons, and it was Hugh Jackson. So how do you, so it's like, it's kind of like having a girlfriend. Like, you give one a chance and then she absolutely burns you. How do you ever trust anyone again? So
Yeah,
but yeah,
yeah.
it's a tough position for the organization, and it's really something the Browns, I can just see them growing from.
It's funny. Some guys are cut out, though, to be position coaches or coordinators and not head coaches, where they don't want to be the father figure, they want to be the homeboy. And with Hugh Jackson and certainly Freddie Kitchens, I think that that's the case. With Freddie Kitchens a year ago, when he decides to run the ball on like a 4th and 9, or he puts his offense back out on the field on a 4th and 11, he takes a false start penalty on purpose and then puts his offense back out on the field on
It's
4th and
not cut out for it.
16. That can't happen as a head coach at any level of football, let alone in the NFL, when there's only so many head coaching positions available. Really, I mean, like through the first half of the season with Stefanski, like other than that fake punt in week 1 to Baltimore, which I think was very head scratching, he's trying to make an aggressive play. I really have been impressed with what he's done because he's also the play caller for this Browns team. So what he's done thus far this season, I think has worked out about as well as any Browns fan could have hoped for. So you know what you have with the guy there. Let Mayfield develop continuity with Stefanski to see what he does well, what he doesn't do well, what he needs to improve upon. He's still only in his 3rd year in the league. And it's so easy for the Browns to look across the AFC North to see, oh, well, the Ravens have Lamar and the Bengals now have Joe Burrow, who looks like he's going to be great. And, Big Ben's been in Pittsburgh for almost 2 decades now. So it's easy to look across the division and say, well, we don't have what they have. You can still win with Baker Mayfield and this team, considering all the different weapons on offense. Like, I think about other NFL teams to where if they were out without their starting right guard, their starting running back, their best wide receiver, and their best tight end, how they wouldn't even be competitive. And okay, the Browns have stumbled a bit in the past 2 weeks, but they're still in these games. And again, at 5-3, you're on pace to go 10-6. Considering where this team traditionally has been, what an accomplishment that would be for this team to make the postseason in 2020.
Yeah, Stefanski has the best record out of any rookie head coach. You get people like Mike McCarthy with the Cowboys, Ron Rivera, even Matt Rule. He's done a fantastic job. And going back to one thing you said a little bit earlier, Baker's looked not so great at the beginning of games. And that was one thing with Coach Freddie Kitchens that was like the only positive with the team. The scripted plays was like the only time that it ever looked like the Browns knew what they were doing last year. And like now, like Baker needs like time to warm up with the game getting started. And you're just like how does this work? Like, because you now have a competent head coach in there. Like you said, Freddie Kitchens is not a guy that's built to be a head coach. He was great as our interim offensive coordinator, but he's just not a guy that's that father figure for a coach. There's like a distrust in the locker room and everything. But that's one thing he actually did do well. The Browns' first 15 to 20 plays always looked good. They looked fluid. We were able to move the ball down the field. But that's something with Coach Stefanski that he definitely needs to work on, because we're coming out cold in all of these games. And we've been able to score in the first quarter in most games. I think today was one of the first times we didn't. But, I mean, we just look kind of lost sometimes.
Yeah, that's hopefully an adjustment that the Browns can make after the bye week of what can we do to get going early on. I think a lot of the guys that are going to come back from injury are going to help with that too. Again, because you're without your starters. Again, I think of, okay, how would other teams do if they were missing the same guys that they have from the positions that I just laid out with the Browns? And I think that that's really going to help this team moving forward. The last question I wanted to get to, though, was you're wearing an OBJ Browns jersey. Do you think Beckham has played his last game as a Cleveland Brown?
So I like hate all of the attention surrounding OBJ 24/7. I feel bad for the guy. And I know like partially he's brought it upon himself with like his win all, lose all mentality and everything like that. But I hate saying it, but I really do think he did play his last down as a Cleveland Brown. I just think, I mean, he's about to turn 28 in like 4 days. So happy early birthday to OBJ. But I mean, an ACL injury is hard. I had one. It's really hard to come back to, and he'll be like 29 by the time he's fully healthy, making $15 million a year. The problem is that's going to be hard to trade. That's a big contract to trade. It's a big personality to trade. he's a good guy. He's a great player. When he's back to full health, I could definitely see him making a big impact wherever he is. But I think that's something that Andrew Berry might want to move on from and go get a younger, cheaper option because, as you've seen in the past couple drafts, there's been some really, really talented wide receivers.
I think he needs to go somewhere where he has a veteran quarterback. I'm thinking like a Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers, maybe in Houston with
Deshaun Watson.
Deshaun Watson, somewhere where he has a veteran quarterback that can bring him in, bring him into the mix, and he can be a key contributor for a team that is a contender. Because when he's on top of his game, like the Browns don't win the Dallas Cowboys game earlier this year if not for OBJ's efforts. When he's on open field, he's as good as any player or receiver in this game. And so certainly he has the talent, but the contract that the Browns are paying him, for whatever reason, he's never quite had that chemistry with Baker Mayfield. And I look at, okay, how often they're targeting him and then the catch percentage. And it just has, for whatever reason, has never been there with Baker Mayfield. So you're paying him $15+ million a year. What can the Browns fetch in return for him? It just hasn't quite worked out. I give him credit for playing in all 16 games last season through a hernia injury. When he got hurt last weekend, he was hustling after a play to try to chase down a guy who had intercepted Baker Mayfield. He was trying to make a play to bring the guy down. And so on the field, his talent is exceptional. Off the field, I think there are a lot of things that he does bring onto himself, whether that he thinks that's part of his brand or not. What I would say is his brand is his athletic excellence. So what are the things that he can do to best maximize that opportunity? Because when he's right on the field, he's as entertaining as any player in the league.
Yeah, I mean, he's just so talented. And I'm pulling for him wherever he goes. I'm hoping he can succeed and stay healthy. And that's another issue. His health, that's one thing that's hard to control as a team, as a player. Like his health has not been good the past couple seasons. And I like major props to him last year for putting up over 1,000 yards with the sports hernia. And I think a lot of people overlook that. Like, yes, his catch percentage was down, his yards per reception were down, but he still put up 1,000 yards with obviously not good chemistry with Baker and a pretty stagnant offense. So there's definitely something left. The Browns can get some value. You're definitely not going to get a first or second back, I don't think. But that's something you got to be able to let go of and just move on from and try to build on from.
They always say the best ability is availability. And so if he's healthy, if he's right, he's as good as any player in the league. I think if he goes somewhere like Green Bay to where he could either be the Batman or Robin to Devontae Adams with that receiving core, if he can go somewhere where, okay, if he does go to the Texans and the Texans also re-sign Will Fuller, that would be quite a tandem in Houston as well. So I'd be curious to see if possible destinations for OBJ. I just think for whatever reason, it hasn't worked out with the Browns. And I know him and Jarvis Landry, their relationship going back to their LSU days, about how much they wanted it to work out here. But it's no secret that Landry has a lot better chemistry with Baker Mayfield. And we've seen that through a large sample size now, through like a season and a half with OBJ. And for however long Jarvis has been a team member of the Cleveland Browns. But Landry, for whatever reason, has just been that constant to this offense of the one guy that you can always depend on and always count on with this Browns offense. And another guy who's battling through injuries with a cracked rib. Hopefully he's okay after that hit that he took towards the end of the game. But I'm going to be curious. I really think it really depends on what the Browns could get back, whether it's a third-round pick or maybe there's a position need that the Browns need from the defensive standpoint. I wouldn't be surprised if the Browns try to move on from him. I'm not sure if he's the right fit with this team.
Yeah, and it's kind of a lose-lose if you think about it, because if he goes somewhere else and he just totally balls out, then people are like, what were the Browns thinking? Like, why would you trade him? Like, this is vintage OBJ. So, I mean, like, if you think about keeping him too, like, you do get an OBJ back because chemistry is good with Baker, then you have an all-pro wide receiver. But if you trade him, I mean, it can really go any way. And it comes down to Andrew Berry, and it might be one of the bigger calls of his career so far.
I agree. And I think you can't just look at the raw numbers with Mayfield too, because the way that this team used him often was as a decoy. I remember there was a play earlier on in the season on a touchdown pass to Kareem Hunt where they took Hunt out of the backfield and lined him up as a wide receiver. OBJ gets a double team, and you have Kareem Hunt on the perimeter with a linebacker. There aren't many linebackers that are going to be able to guard Kareem Hunt one-on-one in coverage in this league. And so just everything that he can do to take the top off of a defense cannot be overlooked, especially if you're just looking at the raw numbers that he brings to the table. I think that's the wrong way of looking at things.
Yeah, teams and fans and critics, they don't realize how much attention someone like OBJ garners from opposing defenses with just game planning and preparation all week. He's double teamed. You put safeties on him, you put corners on him. It just doesn't, people like stats don't account for that. And people who don't watch the Browns don't realize how much pressure he takes off of the rest of the offense. And that was something I was really like eager to watch today. And we really didn't get the chance because there wasn't a lot of passing. But he just takes so much attention away for the rest of the offense. And I mean, if the Browns do trade him, you got to go out and grab someone that can stretch the field like OBJ does, someone that's a deep threat. Because right now, I mean, Donovan Peoples-Jones had that humongous catch last week, but he's still young. Like, you got to go find that guy that can go get that 40-yard touchdown for you.
100%. And just the style of receiver, I totally hear that. And in a trade, if you don't get a first or a second round pick for OBJ, can you get multiple later round picks, or can you get another player and maybe a pick back? Can you maybe get multiple assets back for OBJ? And they might not be as prestigious of a star in this league, but what can you get? What can you fetch back in return for him? Because I still think he does have value at 28 years old. There's still some miles left in the tank for him. I know he's battled injuries dating back to his days with the Giants, but you look at his stats from like his first 5 years in the league, dude was unbelievable. And I know it's something that the Browns fans have wanted to see from him, and you saw flashes of that in the Dallas game. You're not going to get that from him every week. Just because he puts up 100 yards doesn't mean his team is going to win. His teams actually have a losing record in games where he has more than 100 yards receiving. But again, you just see what he can do. You would hope that, okay, if the Browns do decide to move on from him, can they get as much as they can in return? I think that's a great point that you made, John, in terms of the decision that Andrew Berry and this front office has to make in regards to OBJ, just because, again, a really, really exciting player.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, he's a franchise caliber player when he's healthy and playing at that all-pro level like he did with the Giants.
So the bye week next weekend, you've got the Texans in week 10. Remember, the Texans fired their head coach, Bill O'Brien. Romeo Crennel, now the interim head coach there. I would imagine that the Browns would be favored in week 10, but I'm curious to see which guys the Browns get back for week 10 following the bye week. Again, you're playing today without OBJ. You're playing without Austin Hooper. You're playing without Nick Chubb, Wyatt Teller. Hopefully Myles Garrett's MRI, we're going to knock on wood here that turns out okay, because if the Browns lose him, you're talking about changing the course of this entire season. You said it too. Myles Garrett, the way he's been playing, defensive player caliber football for this Browns defense, and the most important player on this team by far.
Yeah, I mean, the two best players on this team coming into the season, I would always say in the preseason, were Nick Chubb and Myles Garrett. And if you have those two guys out, then your team is really, really depleted. And Myles Garrett is a game-changing player. You see it every week. You saw it this week. We couldn't he creates so many turnovers. And today we just couldn't do it. We couldn't get one turnover. And with the strip sacks, he's so good at strip sacking. And I think he had one play on Carr. Ronnie Harrison also dropped the interception, which would have turned the game around. But I think Myles went for the ball too much versus just going for Carr. And there was an inside block on that too. But still, I think with Myles' potential and ability and strength, that he probably could have gotten to Carr on that play and gotten the sack versus just trying to get the strip sack.
Watching him rush the passer is art. And
it is an art, yeah.
He has these cat-like reflexes to where he doesn't just go for the bone-crushing hit. He's so cognizant of where the ball is to try to force those strip sacks to create turnovers. You turn the ball over and you give your offense a shortened field, and he's been so good at that for the Browns this season. Came into this game leading the NFL in sacks, and so keep your fingers crossed there. An MRI Monday. Hopefully he's okay there. He will have the bye week to get right as well, too. So hopefully it's not anything substantial, because that would be a massive blow for this Browns defense.
It really would be. And with our defense being the Achilles heel of this team, in my opinion, that's something that could just totally derail the season.
If he is right, though, I'll say this, and I've said this for the last few weeks. Two things. I think the AFC North is now the best division in football, ahead of the NFC West. And I think the AFC North gets 3 playoff teams in 2020. So you've got the Browns, Steelers, and the Ravens. I think all 3 make the playoffs in 2020 with that expanded playoff format where you have 7 teams per conference get in. And at 5-3, again, I go back to, you can be disappointed today because the Browns were 2.5, maybe a 3-point favorite, depending on the line. But at 5-3, battling some injuries against a Las Vegas team that's very good. Remember, this is a Raiders team that beat the Chiefs earlier this season. You know, you might be disappointed with the loss today, but 5-3 headed into the bye week with the first-year head coach. You got to be pretty happy with where this Browns team is at through 8 weeks of the NFL season.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. If I'm making it to the playoffs, I don't want to play the Steelers or the Ravens. I think those are 2 of the best teams in the AFC. And if the Browns do go and get a lower seed, you might pull someone like the Steelers, who, in my opinion, have the best defense in the NFL. So I think it's a real scary division this year, and it's legit. Like,
Yeah,
there's no question about it.
that front 7 for Pittsburgh is awfully scary, and I would not want to be an opposing quarterback going up against them or the Ravens. We know what the Ravens can do last season, going 14-2 a season ago with Lamar coming off an MVP season too. So, and look, I say the AFC North, I think this Bengals team is friskier than a lot of people can imagine. And so kind of my counter against the NFC West is, okay, the Rams have swept the NFC East. Kyler Murray and the Cardinals still on the up and up. The 49ers have been decimated with injuries, and I don't think Seattle's defense is all that great this season. I know everyone's been psyched about let Russ cook this season, but I think that's been because of how bad the Seahawks defense has been. So you count for all of those things. I'm taking call me a homer. I'm taking the AFC North against the NFC West as the best division in the NFL.
First off, I just want to say I'm super high on Russell Wilson. I think he's a great quarterback. He's such a good player. There was even rumors about trading for him at one point, the Browns. I kind of wish that would have happened. That would have been nice. But we're sticking with Baker, though. I trust them. But I think one thing that people don't talk about enough is the Ravens front 7. Because you went out in the offseason, you got Calais Campbell, and then like a week ago they went and got Yannick Ngakoue, who's an awesome pass rusher from the Vikings for almost, it was like a 3rd or 4th round pick. Like, they were asking for a 1st rounder for him this past offseason, the Jags were. So I that's something that really hasn't been talked about by many people, but I think that's a huge move by the Ravens.
I think every NFL team would want Russell Wilson other than the Kansas City Chiefs. I think the Chiefs are like, okay, we're good with Mahomes, but pretty much every other NFL team would be like, yeah, we'll take Russell Wilson over our guy. So I hear you there. And then, yeah, I mean, the Ravens, look, there's a reason why that formula of ground and pound leading the NFL in rushing a season ago, the highest rushing output by a team in the history of the league, something where you've seen a bit of regression with that with the Ravens this season. Those multiple tight end sets, those tight offensive packages aren't quite as exotic as they were a season ago in Baltimore. You also lose Marshall Yanda, the future Hall of Fame guard, and then they've had some injuries on their offensive line as well. So you knew there was going to be some regression with the Ravens in terms of their rushing output, but playing the Ravens or the Steelers in the playoffs, like, good luck to the teams that will have to do that later this season, because we saw what those 2 teams did to this Browns team. You talk about getting back in, players back from injury, what have you. I'd like to see the Browns play their AFC North opponents a bit tougher the second time that they play each of those respective teams on the back half of the season.
Yeah, we got one versus the Ravens and one versus Steelers, both at home, which could help because I think there'll be more fans at that point in the stadium. There even was before week 1. But before coming into this season, I said, if you want to make the playoffs, if you're the Browns, you got to split with the Ravens and with the Steelers. I don't think that will happen. I'm hoping we can at least get one from those final 2 games with them. But there's also been other games like the Cowboys where I thought that would be a lot more tougher. Even the Eagles, that the Browns will probably pull out with like we should beat the Eagles. There's really no excuse for that one. Beat the Cowboys. The NFC East is such a joke. But I mean, I would probably bet you just with our luck, with the Browns' luck, that we would probably pull either the Steelers or the Ravens in the first round this year.
Well, hey, you get in and you see what happens. And again, you get in for the first time since the 2002 season. I think that would be a success in and of itself,
For
let
sure.
alone figuring out, okay, is this team capable of winning a Super Bowl? I think making the playoffs in Stefanski's first year would be quite an accomplishment. And
It would
with
be
the NFC
incredible.
East, like, listen, I think you and I could probably call 9 of our friends and field a team of 11 that could probably compete in the NFC East this year. So, hey, I mean, I'm just saying how bad, like, I've seen stories written online of whether a 5-win NFC East team will make the playoffs this season. I don't think that is likely, but that is still a possibility with how bad that division is. But John, as we start to wrap up here on the Browns Nation Station, how can people listen to your show, the Hottest Take Sports Podcast? Go ahead and plug whatever you need to.
Yeah, thank you. So we're on Twitter and at Instagram at the hottest_take pod, at hottest_take pod. And we're on iTunes, we're on Spotify at the Hottest Take Sports Podcast. So go check us out. We cover everything from the Browns, Indians, Cavs, Ohio State. I've had numerous Ohio State football and basketball players on the show, trying to get some Cleveland athletes. It's tough though. But yeah, thank you so much. It would be greatly appreciated if anyone could check out our show. We would love it. And we just love interacting with everyone and talking sports. So, yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's like I get to connect with other people who could just nerd out about the games. It's like that's the best
Exactly.
thing in the world, and just sit around, and I'll be watching Red Zone for the rest of the day while I edit the show. But John, this has been an absolute pleasure. We'll have to do this again soon,
For
figuring
sure.
out, as the Browns move throughout the season, can this team end its postseason drought? And then listen, when that happens, the onus then falls on the Seattle Mariners because they have the longest active playoff drought of any of the pro sports leagues in North America. 2001 for the Mariners. So shout out to the Mariners fans as I
Fingers
sign
crossed.
off here. But for John Achkar, I'm Mark Bergin. Thank you for listening to the Browns Nation Station. Go leave us a 5-star review. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your shows. I will see you next week. I've got an exciting guest lined up for you there during the Browns bye week, but take care. So long, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the Week 8 action.